going to come and talk with the stonemason about stone structures, to which you're all welcome. And on the 5th of July, the Finnish architect Henna Helander is going to come and talk about Aalto, the Painio Sanatorium, and Finnish architecture. So please put those dates in your diary, and you'll get an invitation. And if you're not on our kind of email mailing list because a friend has invited you, put your email address, and then you can join the list. Well, Helen and others.
Yeah, well, this is Miriam, publisher at Nerf Flag.
Hi, good evening. So, dear all, so let me begin with a quotation. The quest to bring academia and practice closer to one another is a very relevant and topical one. And this contribution, looking into the possibilities of such a reconciliation from different angles, most welcome. So these are the laudatory words of one of the reviewers of the Hybrid Practitioner. And today I would like to take this opportunity to very briefly sketch the collaboration between Dorrian University Press and Voet and Thomas to realize this work that bridges the gap between theory and praxis and the delivery of the Hybrid Practitioner. Helen is no stranger to the University Press. In 2016, she co-edited the book Autonomous Architecture, which was also published with our press. This volume has gone exceptionally well, and last year we had to secure some of the last remaining copies of the work used. And we have currently reached out to the again on the occasion of a conference, the practice of architectural research, and it's going to take until enthusiastic response, reception of the autonomous architecture volume, both in the scholarly and professional field of architecture. There was strong confidence in the new volume with the same double target audience. Throughout, the collaboration with Eireen and Helen was exemplary. So, and just within the span of 3 years, the conceived book grew from a pitch, a book proposal, a manuscript that was highly positively reviewed, to the published book that will, as one other reviewer put it, add significantly to contemporary architecture itself and standing. So from the very start, the editors were eager to opt for an open access publication, aiming for the broadest audience possible. So, and I am very delighted to say that from its publication to today, over 4,000 downloads have been recorded, with the book finding an audience on every single continent, with the sole exception of Antarctica for now. So, with a rapidly growing architecture title, we are particularly proud to have the Practitioner under the Leuven University umbrella. And I am delighted to see so many of you gathered here this evening to engage with this work. And I hope that it will inspire new ideas and fruitful discussions. And in conclusion, whilst many of you have already familiarized themselves with open access version of the book, I would like to invite you to browse the version of the Hybrid Practitioner book today. So today we're offering a discount of 30% on the Hybrid Practitioner, as well as a 25% discount on our urban planning list. So, and of course, I will be available after the presentation should any of you want to discuss any potential project. So, thank you.
Hello, well, I'm Helen Thomas, one of the aforementioned editors of the book, and with Eireen Schreurs and Caroline Voet here in front. And so I'm just going to do a really introduction before we move on to Yeoryia. Why does that have to be here?
Can we do something about the beta monitor?
Maybe we should throw this out.
Do it have to?
What is this?
Should be playing
It makes noise.
I'm really a man. So we're going to present the first private practitioners, and then.
What is this?
I thought you were a pro. Come on.
The home practitioner started as popular in 2020. It was planned to be in the beautiful Vanderland monastery in Belgium, but it was an online conference. So it's still incredibly enjoyable. 3 conferences, and the third one is just about to begin, and tomorrow we're going off camping in Dorrian. So the conference started off with a question which is very important to the book as well, by Eireen in 2017, which is, are architects who write a dying race? Or how involved are practicing architects in constructing the culture of architecture, its history, theory, and perceptions of it as a cultural form? So there was an intention to overlay the perspectives of different practitioners, most having some engagement with academia, on what the research field could be that operates between design practice and the formation of history and theory. So practices of research are also practices of communicating, teaching, writing, drawing, model making, editing and publishing, as well as belonging to the more contingent and commercial professional environment of construction. So the book is not a direct reproduction of the conference papers. We went through a prolonged period of conversation and reflection, selection of papers to and invitations and commissions of new papers for the book. We reflected particularly on the kinds of knowledge that practicing architecture produces and the kinds of practice that emerges out of this. So the most significant difference and outcome to these reflections was the emergence of the figure of the hybrid practitioner, who didn't inform the initial conference at all. So this figure emerged, and this character, whose nature is represented by the various authors included in the book, but also examined by them, consumes, produces, and wields knowledge and tools that the book seeks to examine. At the same time, by introducing a figure, the hybrid practitioner, the places that they inhabit also come under scrutiny. The office, the studio, the School of Architecture, and the workshop, for example. So the frameworks that order these physical and conceptual spaces are questioned. The rules and conventions of academia, the relationship between the intellectual idea and intuition, and to furious step away from the reality of architectural practice in order to re-describe it in political terms, for example. As with the issues defining the conference, those of the book resonate with a bigger and seemingly simple question around what an architect is. What does being an architect actually mean now? And what roles are possible in our present and going forward for students studying architecture today? So I just wanted to show you the contents page because some of our authors are here today. Thank you for coming along. And I just wanted to actually just name check everybody. So I'll do that very quickly. So after an introduction by the 3 of us, an essay by Eireen, Schreurs, Eva Schreurs, Mann, and Michaels that draws out the definition of the figure of the hybrid practitioner that emerged from the symposium. So the book is organised into 5 sections. The practice perspective and its framework provides an agenda for exchange and reflection between architectural theory, writing, design and making. And this includes writing by Christophe Graff, Eireen Davici, Pauline Lefebvre, Brigitte Louise Hansen, Sophia Sara from Tasting, and Elke Couchet. The second section, reciprocal negotiations, teaching architecture, is concerned with the two-way negotiations taking place in the School of Architecture between people, methodologies and ways of thinking. So Carolina Voet and Stephen Schaefer are both here. Rosamund Diamond, Tom Coward, can't see him quite loud, but he's here. Louis Mays and Phil Christou, and Sarah Mandias. The section Different Worlds in Other Places questioned the paradigm of a single reality, me. Sefde Karami, Jana Kulek and Yeoryia contributed to that section. The fourth section, Stepping Back from the Object, engages with the strategy for stepping outside the creative practice of designing and away from the design object itself towards mechanisms of reflection and dissemination. Contributors are Catalina Noisting, Joseph Bedford, Patrick Lynch, and Carla Manon. Finally, the values of the object return to the architectural object as a subject of research, their physical presence and their processes of invention and construction. And the writers are Wilfred Rang, Paolo Providencia, Luis Buriel Bielsa, and our wonderful host, Simon Henley. So now I'm going to introduce to you Yeoryia Manolopoulou and William Mann, who are going to speak now. So Yeoryia Manolopoulou is an architect, co-founder of AY Architects, and professor of architecture and experimental practice at the Barclays. In 2003, she completed a design-based PhD about aleatoric art and architecture. She wrote Architects of Chance at Routledge 2013 and founded and edited the Bartlett Design Research Folios between 2008 and 2022. She was nominated AJ Emerging Woman Architect of the Year in 2014 and co-created Losing Myself in 2016 Venice Biennale. William Mann is an architect and writer, publishing essays in the AR, Casabella, Oasa and Archis, amongst others. He's director of Wilfred Mann Architects in London, established in 2001, and Sterling Prize winner in 2013 for the transformation of Astley Castle. So Yeoryia, over to you.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Simon, for hosting us all tonight. I want to start by saying that the hybrid practitioner is always in a place of uncertainty and feels comfortable in this uncertainty. The architectural profession requires architects to present themselves with certainty and authority. Architects need to convince clients, funding bodies, planning authorities, and the broader public in order to win their support for the materialization of projects, from the early conceptual phase to all stages of consultation and design refinement. Society and our profession put architects on this challenging journey of pursuing and communicating ideas with clarity and conviction, even when contradiction, doubt, and uncertainty prevail. In so doing, architects can end up concealing the vulnerability, variability, and evolution of their thinking. The coherent and totalizing visions that architects present to the public through their buildings, their city making, are far more absolute than the fluidity and ambiguity of their imagination and certainty. Time for research, whether through writing, drawing, or making, is a refuge and can give architects the opportunity to understand their doubts and uncertainties, to accept the many things they're not sure about, and to learn. It is a rewarding, they can do that in a rewarding and independent way, whether this is kept private or eventually is shared. My past is hybrid, but I tend to forget that. I'm a hybrid because I'm heterogeneous in origin, in language, in culture, and in my profession. Half of my years in Greece, half of my years of my age in Greece, and half of the rest of them in the UK. As a student of architecture in Athens between 1987 and 1994, I was immersed in a heavy and layered curriculum from structural engineering calculations to ancient architectural history, which had to be left to meticulous detail on the footnotes of books, to planning legislation, to field trips to survey settlements on the islands, to exams, sculpture, painting, and skiography, the complex geometrical study of shadows. This was paralleled by constant and iterative drawing and model making in the studio, a lot of respect to modernism, particularly Le Corbusier, through my teacher Tassos Biris, and one-to-one adventurous constructions happening in the atrium of our neoclassical building. My education was also political and very social. We were in the midst of social upheaval, strikes and demonstrations involving twice a student occupation of the school for 6 months, meaning a squat for 12 months in total. After graduating and studying 2 years of practice in Athens, I came to the Bartlett and its spectacular world, very different world, of making and phantasmagoric drawing. This model is by then student Marlene Weiser, who is now an architect in Berlin, and this is by Justin Bell, an architect in Copenhagen. At the Bartlett, process, representation, and narrative mattered far more than I had ever imagined. In 1996, I started a PhD on the subject of chance with my supervisor, Phil Tabor. I was interested in the correspondences between human experience and design method. I wanted to develop a creative and critical understanding of chance as a philosophical and spatial idea, an aspect of aesthetic experience, and possibly a design method. Chance had not been seriously discussed or theorized in architecture, so I had to look into the arts. My study of Samuel Beckett's work involved making a viewing instrument to try out perception possibilities. My effort to understand Marcel Duchamp's art coefficient as the difference between the artist's intention and realization involved drawing. What we realize in drawing, building, and writing can only match a part of our intention. Where is the rest gone? My study of John Cage's chance operations involved more drawing, most happening in large A3 sketchbooks where drawing and note-taking were happening simultaneously. There was reading and writing, but it was necessary to also draw and make. Seriality, play, repetition, and variation were tested here in this adaptable model of micro shutters. Okay, being a mother with 3 children, 2 of which are twins, a boy and a girl, adds to the hybridity and the hybrid nature of my life. And this is why, although my PhD was completed in 2003, the book about it came out 9 years later in 2012. Architecture is a reciprocal passage between chance and design. Architectural design takes the infinite range of possibilities available to it to produce a singularity. The process negates the totality of chance to release a design. The building or drawing is a sole creation out of an infinite number of possibilities. It is a restriction of the universal chance, we could say. But the building, despite its resilient nature and efforts to resist chaos, will never put an end to chance. Chance will eventually conquest design. Time and again, the building and the city will produce entropies towards non-design, manifesting an inevitable overall inclination towards chance. And the book defines 5 techniques of chance: impulsive, systematic, fabricated, active, and resistant. My teaching and research were and have always been paralleled by an engagement with practice. In AY Architects, co-founded with my life partner, Anthony Boulanger, I'm a designer but also a critic. And I often feel, as half of an architect, someone who does not follow the whole business of building, but who is involved in many of its design aspects. This is our Montpellier community nursery in Kentish Town. And this is our House of Flags, based on a political version, a multinational version of the Eames House of Cards. This is just to give you an idea of the things we do. Designing these tiles as flutes that can vary in position and change configuration links back to my interest in variation and chance. And I want to talk a little bit about teaching as well. I want to cover the three areas that the book covers and do what Helen asked us. We talked a lot about how we see ourselves as hybrid practitioners. So for me, teaching is a place for giving and for learning. It's a shared space made collectively by tutors and students. For me, teaching is not the place where I try to confirm my design and writing ideas, and it's not the place where I want to carry out research. Others do this very, very well. This image is from a drawing workshop in 2020, where we all drew and you know, slept, ate, and even prayed with the monks in La Tourette. And this is a snapshot from a collective drawing project done in Orkney over 5 days. As a design tutor, I have enjoyed 20 years of teaching with Niall. Often architects choose to teach with their practice partners or junior assistants to give consistent support to their students, and sometimes singular support. Niall and I did not choose each other as teaching partners initially, but found the process of teaching together, while not sharing the same background, extremely rewarding. And perhaps a combination of tutors who disagree and who are hybrid in their pairing may be a blessing for students. Last year's collective project, co-taught with Thomas Parker, happened at Grimsdyke Farm, where we stayed for a week. Drawing and glazing nearly 400 tiles was paralleled by a performative construction that involved unraveling and installing 30 kilometers of rope on the land as a kind of a large three-dimensional inhabitable drawing. And while my earlier research on chance concerned mainly individual engagements with chance by artists and designers, this project that I will talk about, run at the University of Quebec, focused on the complex cognitive and creative possibilities that can emerge within a group of designers who can share a space and design instructions as an ensemble. The work started with creating single drawings like the ones you see on the screen in response to prompts that I gave to the group. 17 designers produced 17 individual drawings to establish a kind of grammar for the design process. Scores in music, in choreography, use notations and instructions to structure a creative process over time. Can something similar happen in architecture? The open architectural score enables improvisation, non-habitual and non-hierarchical relations and encounters. It trusts the design process rather than predicts the outcome, and it encourages both autonomy and collaboration. Architects have the responsibility to accept and imagine multiple voices and versions of reality, and to stitch these differences together even when they disagree with each other. In a building, at times the different voices can be brought all together as a chorus. At times they can be taken apart. And an aspect of hybridity is always dialogue. Dialogue allows us to include in our own perspectives as architects the perspectives of others. This is what Niall and I tried to do when we worked on our project about dementia for the 2016 Venice Biennale. We had conversations with families who have loved ones living with dementia, with healthcare managers, with health policy experts and dementia design experts, with neuroscientists and anthropologists. And we also invited other architects to draw with us. Here we see Michiko Shumi drawing in the company of photographs of her own family. In Losing Myself, hundreds of drawings were produced, configured and reconfigured in versions of an architectural plan that was both egocentric and allocentric, and that a plan that aimed to capture the experience of building rather than a fixed and totalizing image of the building. It's interesting, I like very much in the book Paolo Providencia's image of Alvaro Siza lying on the floor, drawing, tracing, researching, and inhabiting his own drawing and his own research. Architectural scores were made to guide the digital assembly of all the films we made while we drew by hand various parts of the plan. And the result embodied multiple stories, drone and sonic realities, the things we learned from the patients and their families, and the things we learned by the specialists in neuroscience, policy, and health. Our writing about this project communicates the lessons we learned, but sometimes I think words are not enough, and this is where our discipline and the process of drawing is very, very useful. Our installation in Venice embodied aspects of the research that words could not capture. Finally, as Helen mentioned, Hilde Heinen in the book asks, and in the conference I believe, asked the very good question, are architects who write a dying race? And I would add, are academics who write but not build or design a dying race for many of our architectural schools? For many of our architecture schools. At the Bartlett, I have tried to support designers and architects like myself to continue to design by defining and promoting the research work as research, by revealing the level of inquiry in their projects. Without the design research folio series that we have established in the school, that explains why and how drawings, performances, models, buildings, and urban designs embody research, many of us would either have to only write in order to fulfill our academic obligations, or to not be in academic positions and teaching positions. The series covers field works as well as experimental design, and each folio unpacks a world of context, processes, methods, failures, and the results of the research, showing things, I think, that conventional architectural publishers may exclude or separate into different genres of publications. Our first step started back in 2005, but the particular series started in 2012 and has succeeded in convincing universities and research funding institutions to recognize and fund design activity as research. And many other architectural schools are trying to do the same, to argue for this position. We have more than 70 books so far, and all the books are on open access, so you can find them if you wish to take a look. In my dream, this series should expand far beyond the Bartlett boundaries, and this is why it feels very good to be here and to be sharing this with you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Helen. Thanks, Simon. So this book raises some very interesting questions. I've enjoyed it a lot. I think both the individual essays, which are kind of nicely bite-sized, and then the breadth of the whole, across a range of very diverse subjects, have prompted me to reflect about things that I haven't put an awful lot of thought to previously. About this relation between building, teaching, researching, the three elements of the subtitle. And well, my reflection then is, I'm increasingly drawn to the proposition that we architects know nothing. 4 decades after I started trying to acquire knowledge about this thing that we call architecture, this feeling of ignorance is strangely liberating. When we draw, talk, model, send emails about buildings that don't yet exist, we know nothing or very little with any certainty. We work with a range of conventions through a series of ever closer approximations to gather together the products of varied know-hows. Aren't our tools what philosophers would call heuristics? Conventions and approximations whose utilization gives reasonably predictable results. Of course, individual components will be tested with defined standards, but the whole is almost certain to be a modestly unprecedented configuration of parts in a unique location in a social situation that isn't entirely predictable. And the architect and the situation that they reshape or shape may be knowable in retrospect, but not in the moment, not in the process of conception and making. So I suppose I'm suggesting that the hybridity in the title is between very different, perhaps unequal substances, between knowledge and convention, between precision and approximation, or perhaps like a bit less approximate than the approximate, or a bit looser than the precise, between fundamental research and rules of thumb. In the university system, which in Britain has overarched architecture since 1958, in Flanders actually it's been quite recent, and the old academies have been incorporated in the universities. In the university system, the architecture student is something of an anomaly. Learning the tools not of knowledge but of judgment, acquiring them through rehearsal, repeated rehearsal, without ever testing them in performance, or only very partially. And the architecture researcher is largely obliged to operate within the template either of the exact sciences, building physics, or the human sciences, historical research, observing and drawing conclusions about what is knowable, things that are either repeatable or resolutely past. So now there'll be no shortage of attempts to define our discipline according to timeless principles, geometry and measure, underpinned by the authority of Pericles and Augustus, or with approaches borrowed from other fields, very good at magpieing other people's theories and not really understanding them. Among them, mechanical, biological, linguistic analogies, very beautifully traced in Peter Collins's Changing Ideals in Modern Architecture. But it seems to me we can't really agree, we seem to be unable to agree on the limits or foundations of our discipline. The act of building is indispensable, but in a way the essence that binds those of us who seek to guide it is rather elusive. It should be perhaps no surprise that our so-called discipline, with its bearing points in convention and approximation, is prone to rhetoric, fashion, and abrupt course corrections. However, the plasticity of the discipline isn't just the result of inadequate foundations, it's a product of a landscape that's shifted under and continues to shift under multiple stresses. If I sketch out the drift of the last 4 decades, pretty much since I started studying, this should be clear. Marketisation and competition have created deep insecurity in both practice and universities. Design and build has distanced architects from construction. We build more in constrained urban locations with awkward inheritances. And this has been accompanied by precipitous rises in urban land value, to the point that the value of the building counts for little compared to the plot of land. Hans-Joachim Vogel refers to land in Munich rising in value by 39,000% since the 1950s. Yeah. He didn't even come to London, yeah. The growing digitalisation of both design and fabrication has driven a degree of standardisation, or creates scope for customisation, but also chisels away. Work with existing buildings has grown enormously as a part of a shift from the brittle, high-energy buildings of modernism to durable, lower-energy buildings. The humanities have been increasingly devalued, or certainly the academic premium for humanities teaching was withdrawn in the last couple of years by this government. Devalued relative to science and engineering. And obviously innovation has been elevated to a form of highest good, inherently superior to conservation. These leave us facing the substantial challenges of our current century with fragile tools, both intellectually and practically. The glass is half empty. Give me a minute. How can architects, teachers, and researchers respond to these dynamics and openings? So certainly examples of practicing architects' reflections that have spoken to me over the years include Alvaro Caesar's extraordinary text about his Malagueira housing scheme. It's just been published in English by, it's called Imagining the Evidence or something like that, where he asserts the importance of logistical constraints, the shortage of tiles in Évora in 1975, the cross-subsidy of a kind of concrete block factory by the council. So it's all these kind of really logistical constraints, practical considerations, the turbulent political process of the Saal and the post-Carnation Revolution. So gently puncturing any superficial reading that suggests it's all about some sort of reference to what Das Neue Frankfurt or I don't know what, some sort of game, referential game. It's sort of deeply, deeply grounded in the essence of the time and the constraints. Rafael Moneo's ideologically charged but very thoughtful examination of Mesquita in Cordoba. Or Peter Smithson's exploration of city and institution, set piece and as found, part and whole, in his Oxford and Cambridge walks, particularly. These kind of reflections by practicing architects set the bar high. I mean, research they ain't, but they set the bar high. And there are accounts by architectural historians which feel like a mirror to the processes that we live in the day-to-day. So, Eric Altenhofer's study of the complex force field in which Dolgast was working for the Alte Pinakothek, opening this tension between the provisional and the durable, and just in the sort of politics of Bavaria from 1945 to its opening. And Marvin Trachtenberg's study of the Duomo in Florence, amongst other things, in Building in Time, from its stop-start beginnings through Brunelleschi making a model with a turnip. Danny Liebeskind, you know where you can put your teapot. To Talenti's completion of Campanile, ignoring and probably improving on Giotto's design. So these are prompts that I have tried to follow in essays that I've written intermittently over recent years. In Inhabiting the Ruin, written for for the Association of Studies in the Conservation of Historic Buildings. Highly recommended. I excavated and interrogated our own design process for Astley Castle, trying to understand how the sublime nature of ruin was grasped and maintained in our intuitive and disputational design process. It's not something like we started off at the beginning, we said, okay, we're going to keep the sublime. It's like, you go through a whole journey and then you, afterwards, I mean, all of this for me is these sort of things that are a lot clearer in the rear view mirror. They're not very clear when you're kind of barreling along. In the Upper Lee Valley, written for Wars, I described the isometric drawing projection, which started as a series of each one of these is an A1, and then they're kind of pieced together as a mosaic. So it was kind of selected, and I'd never used it before. I don't think I've used it since, but you know, we selected and developed this projection for the project. And I suppose what I tried to deal with, again in the rearview mirror, is how that played out in discussions of part and whole, with many interests, Thames Water, the Lee Valley Regional Park, the local authorities, GLA Highlev, that you know, shaped this whole thing. In A Latecomer Imagines the City, written for the Sage Handbook of the 21st Century City, which was essentially a sociology publication, I determined to write a text without footnotes, just a few quotations. And what I examined the fine line between professional optimism and false consciousness in urban regeneration. These anxieties about dirt, slowness and age that underpin so much urban design. In an article for Casabella about Hal Killick, Partridge Nemesis, Young Vic, I drew on their Albany Theatre, which we've been doing some work for and on, as well as the history of Burbage's Theatre in Shoreditch, which stood briefly on the site opposite our first building. So these are kind of magpie bits of knowledge that they kind of found us rather than, you know, us finding them. Exploring the relation between the most ephemeral and the most durable forms of culture, theatre and building. Most recently, in an essay called The Slit Twixt Cup and Lip, many a slit twixt cup and lip, I picked up this question of time, looking at the way that speed of construction, where medieval large projects took centuries. This is 10 centuries of Rouen Cathedral here on the second left. St. Peter's and the Vatican, Bramante's death, lots of kind of ruins and part finished projects. 40 years of Johnstone at the Bank of England, and the Crystal Palace, 92,000 square metres in 4 months. So how that sort of speed both does and doesn't change fundamental challenges of economic volatility and obsolescence. The common strand between these sort of reflections is perhaps the way that constraints offer clarity, direction, a kind of freedom. At the basic level, talking and writing offer me, us, an escape valve. Just sort of a bit more this pub talk written down and then structured a bit. Therapy to process the waking dream of practice. The challenges of building a rhetorical, financial, logistical, deeply physical. It's a game where individual fictions make the passage to physical existence and collective experience on the basis of their apparent coherence, but also their cultural resonance. If you've lost a competition, you'll know what I mean. The separation of fantasy and fiction, or of logic and emotion, are often arbitrary and always socially constructed. And when we have small fragments of knowledge, accepting the partial nature of this knowledge, or admitting ignorance, offers us a form of self-knowledge. So we can try, in this sort of search for self-knowledge, to reflect on these activities that become second nature. So just as a 10-year-old learns to dribble a football without looking at it, we learn to read and speculate through drawing. And if you're having to concentrate on what you're drawing, then you can't think. So it has to become an automatism. How does this medium, because it's not a tool, how does it help us work from appearance to essence, or to work at both the logical and emotional levels? So knowing ourselves also perhaps involves examining our actions as disinterestedly as possible, and that's why Caesar's text is marvellous. It is sort of he's very detached from his own experience. He's not trying to convince or sell. Part of this self-knowledge is understanding how having a body shapes our ability to imagine. In other words, what can we do that AI couldn't? Which with AI, there's a new Oasis album, AISIS, various all these sort of things. This is not a major anxiety for me, but it's an interesting cultural kind of reflection. How having a body is a fundamental part of not so much of knowing. Probably, philosophers would say having a body is a barrier to knowledge, but it's an absolute precondition for acting in the world. So we can try to reflect on these activities that become. When we situate ourselves in a multiplayer game, as almost every building project is, how do the mechanics of the imagination parallel mechanics of negotiation, arbitrating between different interests within the city? This opens questions about the power of narrative, as well as the slippery slope of false consciousness, where you believe yourself to be a free agent when you're actually serving other people's interests, or interests that you don't acknowledge. You should at least acknowledge them. Understanding the architect's imperfect agency because we live it every day. We know that control is a myth. Authorship is possible but highly conditional and collective. So in a way, we should be harder to fool about the work of our predecessors than anyone approaching it as some sort of hallowed artifact. And finally, considering the larger whole, perhaps we have a no less imperfect knowledge of the city than a social scientist or an engineer, because it's so extremely complex that none of us really know it. We just grasp bits of it. Summarised by Claude Lévi-Strauss as both natural object and a thing to be cultivated, individual and group, something lived and something dreamed, the human invention par excellence. In particular, if we work in or on the city, we grasp how every urban project is unfinished and unfinishable. But yet cities continue to change through accumulation and ongoing transformation at multiple scales. So we might know nothing with certainty, but what we encounter and partially know adds up to a mosaic, hazy and gappy, of human consciousness, of language, and of the city. Thank you very much.
Yeoryia, I've written down 4 questions, and they've actually answered 3 of them already in their talk. So I'm going to contract my questions now and slightly change them as well, because as I was speaking, I was realising something. Do you mind just maybe standing around? Because, no, I don't know, we can just stand up. I don't know. Or do you want to sit down? I asked William and Yeoryia to speak because, to me, they come from very different directions to this idea of the hybrid practitioner. And are you okay with the lighting? And as I was speaking, Thank you very much. I really enjoyed both your presentations, and they really were very different. And they kind of like represented you as different kinds of practitioners. And so, I mean, my first question was in a way about the figure of the hybrid practitioner, who is the star of the evening, and what that meant to you. But I think you've really directly engaged with that question. But as you're speaking, I was thinking, we're all the same generation, and we're at a time now when academia and practice, practice in buildings, are very, very, are in a period of transition. I don't know. I guess I could ask you, do you agree? But also, I'm thinking that we have a sense of it from our generation. But how do young people feel about the idea of the hybrid practitioner? Is it something that is actually just a given? Where it isn't so much necessarily given to our generation. So I don't know. The question is, how do you feel being labelled as hybrid practitioners? And maybe opening it up a little bit to, is this a generational thing? Is there a different idea of it possibly to people who are becoming architects? Or how do you think that you're going to be practicing in your futures or in your immediate futures or present? So you go first, guys.
Well, I guess I could offer two sort of throwaways. One is that if I look at architects who I admire, I guess from the 20th century, what's interesting is to see how they have a voice. When you read what they've written, they have a voice. They didn't write 10,000 word dissertations with footnotes about this, that, the other, as we certainly used to do up in School of Architecture. I don't know if you still do now. But someone like, Fritz Neumeier wrote about Mises writing. And obviously it's sort of full of this sort of, I don't know, overconfidence and gaps and jumps, but it's kind of somehow really fundamental to the way he worked. Alejandro Soto, there's a recent collection of his essays come out in English. Really, and you just sort of feel there's a very distinctive voice. I suppose that's something that strikes me, is that you don't have to be, nobody's asking you to be super articulate, to write footnoted, lengthy footnoted things. But it's almost inescapable that if you've got a clear view about what your job is, that you have a voice.
So the voice is the thing.
And so back to my second throwaway, and then just be that when your young kids have a tantrum or whatever, or they say use your words, and I think that's something that somehow, I don't know if is that hybrid. It's just like
but the articulation of the voice, the presenting of the voice. I mean, you had a really interesting point. We talked about it before about writing predominating. I don't know, this issue of the voice,
voice, okay.
Maybe in the book, but the voice, is it always through writing? I mean,
no, in my mind, it's not only through writing, it can be embodied in physical things and all sorts of creative output. But when you sent us the invitation, I thought the hybrid practitioner is such a fantastic title. I thought it actually discusses something really important that was missing before, especially when there was fashion around ideas of autonomy, and I'm glad the editing approach realized that the relationship between the arguments about authorship or autonomy. So the idea of the hybrid is I thought it's a fantastic idea and a fantastic book for that reason. When I think about students, I think in the younger generation, I think there are many different types of students. I think there are those who actually look for a lot of certainty at the moment. Actually sometimes I feel less hybridity. They look for more certainty. That's my impression. They may like it.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be quite interesting. I'd love to hear anyone who's like, embarking upon being an architect genuine feel like speaking. If you've been barking, then probably not. It's a bit different. Yeah.
Maybe it's the pressures of time and the way the university is focusing on compressed semesters and outputs that are says you lose a bit of freedom, maybe that and hybrid or losing yourself out, maybe the demand. I don't know if that could be a reason behind that. But others enjoy or thrive sometimes. I don't know.
I mean, I suppose the interesting thing in this then, so okay, there's I guess practices in the nature of being an architect has changed a lot. The nature of architecture schools has changed quite a lot. What's interesting then is what is the evolution in universities. I think there are a number of positive evolutions. I think there is now this idea that universities talk with life and action, that isn't, I suppose, and this is something that I think even 30, 40, 50 years ago was very, this idea that that what Cambridge University would have a business school. It's like, no, we don't do business, and architecture is like just I suppose it's a less lucrative version of the business school. It's a sort of dirty thing. Whereas now, I think universities, there is this pressure to kind of be engaged. Equally, I suppose there's another thing which is, so I think there's lots of kind of terrible pressures that are kind of corrosive and erosive, but equally, so I think that kind of engagement between
so they're coming closer together,
knowledge and
academia and
practice. I think there is there's an impulse there. Equally, I think the fact that now universities in Europe are now doing a lot of teaching in English, postgraduate teaching in English, and that's an amazing evolution, which certainly in Europe is allowing us to share and talk to each other more than I think we historically did. It's kind of quite a special evolution. So I think that change in universities is both in terms of the kind of their sense of orientation, but equally in terms of the things they do and the languages they teach in. Interesting and positive. But it is not a natural fit for that universities educate architects.
No,
Still.
no. I mean, yeah, or art schools. I mean, there is also this balance between art schools and technical schools. I think that you brought up in your presentation a bit.
I guess I think it's very interesting when people have gone through very different systems of education. I think it can be very, very beneficial rather than singular cultures. So, but I suspect there will be a lot of specialization in universities in the future for marketing, commercial reasons, and there will be all of these specialisms, and the idea of the architect as somebody who synthesizes very heterogeneous things, and this is an amazing thing that we can do. I'm worried a little bit about this being not fully understood by universities and or research bodies where everybody wants to know, oh, I want to teach this and fund this type of research, and then the output has to be clear. Because I think what we do as architects very well is this relational understanding of the world, of reality. And I think that who's going to fix that?
But so Yeoryia, as society and the economy, to speak in big abstraction, is pulling the rug from under the profession, how do we get enough fixity to then communicate within the university system that this is a valid form of partial knowledge, synthesis of partial knowledge?
By even saying that the building or the building which contributes very positively to a place, but also to the discipline, is embodies research. I think we have to present architecture as this field. We have to speak in that language to describe it as research in order for it to be appreciated and to be funded. I think it's almost like a cycle. It's like a cycle.
I'm sure expediently that works, but it troubles me slightly that.
But I think when I mean, you don't have to even. I think you personally don't have to enter that world particularly because the way that your habit practitioner doesn't engage with the academia, I think makes it really interesting. The way, like when you're articulating your voice, it's in the professional press.
Random
it's read by architects. Really much more. But I mean, it's kind of like the voice that you're projecting is a different voice to the one that comes out of academia or is on that particular bridge between practice and academia.
Because it's interesting, because you're sort of talking in a way about doubt and uncertainty as being this sort of interesting territory, and it's kind of fantastic if you're able to kind of capture that in as being kind of part of the research, because I guess that's, certainly for me, that's kind of my random publications are quite a good vehicle.
Yeah.
You can just be scathingly honest as it's sort of you're required to be. No one's marking you or giving you points or whatever.
Yeah.
So is that kind of
to operate independently is very good.
Degree of or is
Well, I think that's
to what extent is it possible to be honest in something when you're being measured on performance?
Yeah. No, I mean, touching with you mean you do publishing. That's a cultural activity that articulates a voice, that it contributes to the architectural culture, the architectural discourse from outside the academic one. I mean, I think there's the bridges are multiple. And do you have any thoughts on?
We started a publishing house which kind of directly grew out of, if you like, the collapse of the culture of architecture in universities. Somebody died without children and left £300,000 to the university where I was teaching at. And the head of school said, what should we do with it? And so we had ideas about scholarships and research projects, and I suggested that we start a magazine. Because Yale has perspective, the AA files was in the process of dying at the time. And so, because I published some books and used some good designers and publishers, I got tasked with this job. And then the Vice Chancellor took the money and said, the architecture school doesn't have a bank account. So we've got 150 extra Chinese students coming, and I've rented another building, and you owe me money to put your students. Really strange, like and it's
the waking dream of universities.
Yeah, it's really strange. It's like an open goal. If it would have been a referee going on, it would have been straight to the top. But yeah, so we started a magazine because I got a telephone call one day from an academic at Manolopoulou saying, when is Professor essay appearing in your magazine? Because we had and I thought, shit, this is really bad. He's not going to get promotion unless we start a magazine. So I thought, how little does it cost to start a magazine? And, so we, like in a very real way, I had a sense of shame and embarrassment, which was mixed with a sense of hope and optimism and joy of discourse and dialogue, versus a very, very cynical situation where the university, which had been a place for autonomy and spreading into this kind of stupid and short-sighted. They've got a property developer in charge of the university, an ex-architect, and no value for culture. And so everything I'm doing with this publishing house is a kind of alternative to academic publishing, where the books are produced, they cost £150, they're very ugly, they're black and white. There's a whole not I hate to but that's partly because the Belgian government still funds higher education properly.
Well, then you have research articles that are published behind a paywall, and then obviously the background to this is then when we were students there was a professional press. Now that is.
Let's not get too much into these mechanisms.
But these are all. But this is then the thing where stuff has changed, and we have to acknowledge what changed, what we lost, and then actually.
I think it's not cry about what we lost, reminding people of how things used to be. There's a Neat Brown book we just published. It's got a review of Alexander Road, by Bob Maxwell when he was Professor of Architecture at the Bartlett, writing for the professional press, thinking it's a civic duty to talk about a project funded by the state, and his university was funded by the state at the time. But I could go on. When Lee Brown did that project, he was teaching at Cornell with Colin Rowe. He would get up in the morning and he would do some drawing, he would fax it to England. The QS would wake up, he would teach his classes, would come back, the QS would fax back saying, we can't afford to dig a car park for 300 cars. So Lee decided to use the slope of the site. But this is a whole story about the relationship between architecture and academia, which I think is an ongoing one, and we have to fight that.
And I just want to move this, because I mean, I'm picking up on a point you're making, which is segued into my last question, because I'm aware that Mark wants to talk about the Joy Matter Journal, and you're talking about stories, and this is something that we've discussed together. That one of the issues that ties together the different activities of practicing architecture in these different ways is storytelling. Whether it's publishing or writing or drawing or building buildings or selling designs to a client. So Mark, did you want to come up and quickly introduce your...
Sure, I feel exhausted, but I'll try to get up.
Sorry, do you want to just stay there? Do you want to come up?
Yeah, I have some images to show. Is that okay?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Sorry, Patrick, to cut you off. Just we need to make space for all the different components of the issue.
Sorry, it feels late in the day.
Yeah, just probably in the stacks.
You're right, all right.
Why is it? Yeah. Because it's like drawing on its own. It's a picture of what you want to be. Something. Okay. So thanks to Helen and Eireen and Eireen for letting me sort of tag this on at the end of the presentation. I just wanted to say a few words about drawing on a journal, and it feels it's kind of interesting saying this following on from the conversation that we just had there. So about 2.5 years ago, I had an email from Niall Hobhouse, and I know this might sound crazy, but and then a little bit further down the email, he said, "Your problem, Mark, is you always say yes to everything." So it was slightly crazy, and I did say yes to it, and so 2.5 years. I was here with the first issue of Drawing Matter Journal. Now, some of you might be aware of this through the website, through the Drawing Matter website. Some of the, well, in fact, I think pretty much all the articles in this are now live on the website. So it exists in open access on the Drawing Matter website through Drawing Matter Journal links. But it's, oops, I'm not sure what's happened there. Being sabotaged by Kate Northern Press. So I've really no idea what happened there. Does anybody know? I didn't touch it. Okay, anyway, okay. Okay, maybe it doesn't matter, right? Yeah.
Could you have a look?
Okay, oops, the cursor's still there. Look, who cares? It doesn't really matter because I have one copy of Drawing Matter Journal here, so it does exist. We did print more than one. This is not really what exists. So this is the geological imagination. This is issue 1. We're now working issue 2, drawing instruments. Issue 3 will be storytelling. And there will be a call for contributions that will go out for that in the next few days, actually. And then I think we're probably thinking in advance about an issue 4, which will be something like drawing on the margins. So maybe conditions of marginalia, annotation, but also the margins of drawing as a kind of conceptual idea as well. What is drawing as a kind of practice that exists on the margins of the idea of drawing. So it's a refereed journal. It exists consists mostly of articles which are about sort of 5,000 to 8,500 words, and then in between these there are shorter pieces which are really more about the presentation of documentation of one kind or another, sometimes things from the Drawing Matter archive, sometimes other material. So it's sort of, it looks like this. We have there's a nice pink inner sheet which holds the contents, and then the editorial, the introduction, and then it gets into the, oh yes, I should say there's in the geological imagination issue, there's a kind of bonus scattered through. So there are these photographs of John Ruskin's rock collection, which he put together and gave to Reigate School, girls' school, I think, with a series of captions, drawing really interesting captions, which are partly descriptive, partly scientific, but also idiosyncratically moralizing at times as well. So here, for example, is number 5, the label "Black Flint, full of somebody." I don't know who. Gone to pieces. The weather or decomposing surface showing the forms projecting. So these are scattered through as kind of erratics through the text, I suppose. And then we get into the article. So here's Nicholas Boyarsky talking about asphalt tales and the end of history. Interesting things like the Rational Technology Unit, 73 to 74, the Architectural Association. There might be some people in the room remember the Rational Technology Unit. Here's Joseph Boyce, actually in Edinburgh. See one of Richard DeMarco's events in Edinburgh. And something that looks like an SNP conference was actually Alvin, Buckminster Fuller, and Cedric Price. So this is the Scottish Oil event that Alvin Boyarsky, Ricky DeMarco held in Edinburgh in 1972, I think. So this is about, it's about asphalt, it's about stickiness, it's about speed. It's about Oscar Hansen's The Road project for Auschwitz as well. Another Ruskin Rock. And then we have Nicholas Olsberg on Ernest Bourne's Bart, Glenview Park, Bay Area Rapid Transit Station, which has an interesting geological mural marbles. Michael Chapman on Shallow Cuts, the geological sectioning of Newcastle, New South Wales. So this allows us also, this piece is about forms of representation to do with the coal strata and with the mining in Newcastle, New South Wales, and interesting reflections on the relationship between the urban grid and property prices and the subterranean excavation of the property parcels and coal seams below. This also allows me to show that the journal also has these remarkable unfolding images as well. So anyway, you get the general idea. It's been really a pleasure. I mean, it's been very hard to work on, but it's been, I mean, hard in the sense it's been a lot of work, but it's been a real pleasure to work on this. And I think that the kind of it's very nice working with drawing matter, which are, I mean, I'm pretty sure everybody in this room will know a lot about drawing matter, and just the kind of possibility of doing something like this outside the institutional context of the standard academic journal staples, but also outside the academic context of the university. So I hope as it develops that you will, it will gain attention and you will find things in it that will interest you, and I hope that you will sort of think about submitting proposals for pieces to it. As I say, it exists online in a slightly different format as open access, but it also exists in print version. So, thank you.
Can I just thank Helen and Yeoryia and William for their presentations and conversation and dialogue this evening, and Eireen and Eireen and Helen for this publication, and for bringing us together tonight, for which thank you very much. Please, I hope you'll come back on, I think it's about the 20th of May and on the 5th of July. So do, as well, join the group and keep coming back to our